Hi, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of the Tiny Fit Diva podcast. My name is Kylene Terhune, and I'm your functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. It's my job to help you uncover the hidden stressors contributing to chronic disease so we can remove the stressors, repair the damage, and get you back to optimum health. I'm very excited today to introduce you to Igor Klibanov. Did I say that right?
That's pretty good, yes.
All right, awesome. And I'm going to give you a short little intro. I think you guys are really going to be interested in the topics we're going to cover today. So Igor is the author of the book, Stop Exercising the Way You're Doing It Now. He was selected as one of the top 5 personal trainers in Toronto by the Metro News newspaper. His company specializes in helping women lose fat, get more toned, and have more energy by improving hormonal balance, digestive health, and stress management, all topics we love to talk about on this podcast.
Yep.
Additionally, his laser-targeted approach in using exercise as a treatment for chronic conditions like diabetes, osteoporosis, arthritis, and high blood pressure has earned him acclaim with international bookings for him as a seminar presenter. So I'm really excited to have you joining us. Are you in Toronto right now? Is that where you live?
That is exactly it. Yes, I'm in Toronto.
Awesome.
When it's not winter, it's nice and warm.
Nice. Well, I'm really happy to have you here today. So go ahead and introduce yourself. Who is Igor? Tell me a little bit about your story. How did you get to where you are?
Sure thing. My name is Igor. All while growing up, I was doing both tennis and martial arts. And for martial arts, you need a very different body than the one I have. You know, I'm short, about 5'4", and muscular. For martial arts, for striking, you need to be tall and lanky, which is not what I have. But I'm still very competitive, and I'm also very analytical. So I'm thinking, how can I get above average results with below average genetics? So when I was in high school, I was very serious about martial arts. I started to do all this research into performance optimization, performance enhancement, nutrition, and so on. And I started to get better and better and winning competitions along the way and so on. And eventually it came time to choosing my career, and I went with kinesiology with personal training. But the clients that I was working with were nothing like me. They were not people in their 20s and did not have any ambitious goals of athleticism. That was me, but that wasn't my clients. Most of my clients were women, ages 46 to 60, non-athletes, regular desk jobs, 9-to-5 jobs, just looking to lose body fat, get more toned, and have more energy. So I tried to use the typical approach of, eat less, exercise more, and it worked for a few of them, but it didn't work for a vast majority of them. So I'm scratching my head, and I'm thinking, maybe this isn't working. So maybe I should try to modify my approach, and that led me on a very long 3-year, $20,000 journey on researching hormones, digestion, stress, all these things that affect body fat, body composition, muscle tone, etc., but are not really taught in kinesiology degrees, personal training certifications, and so on.
You're so right. Oh my gosh, everything I know about the body really was not from my personal training certification. I tell you a little bit about the muscles, and that's about it, and how to maybe organize a workout. Yeah.
Oh, that's exactly it. They teach you basic anatomy and basic physiology, but not much more beyond that. Mm-hmm. But especially the population that I was working with, hormones were a big factor, especially menopause, pre-menopause, and so on. So I started research into all these areas, and I was able to help my clients with more than just fat loss. I was able to help them, have more energy, sleep better, get more toned, all this kind of stuff that more than what they were coming to me for. And that's what earned me the acclaim of top 5 trainers in Toronto by the Metro News newspaper. Ended up writing 4 books, and eventually I had more clients coming in that I could take on myself. So I taught my methodology to a very hand-picked team of elite personal trainers, and here we are today.
That's so cool. Good for you.
Thank you.
So I do have to ask you, your name is Igor, and I think you have a slight accent. Where are you originally from?
So I was born in the Soviet Union. Today that part is Kazakhstan. And if the listeners are wondering, I don't know Borat. So only my first 3 years were there. And then the next 7 years I spent in Israel. And then I came to Canada.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's been a journey for you.
Yeah. So when people try to guess my accent, the most common guess I get is French. Which
really?
is incorrect.
Okay. So you've really built your business from the ground up. It was from your own personal interest in trying to personalize your approach for your clients. And then you found out that it worked. And so you multiplied it, which is amazing. So you own your own gym. Is that right?
Not quite my own gym, but I mean, I work out of a gym, but I own my own personal training company. So my trainers do in-home personal training within the Greater Toronto area, as well as online training a little bit.
Oh, okay. That's really neat. So, all right. So you specialize in what you call prescriptive exercise.
Correct.
So can you kind of explain what that means and how that approach is very different from what we're used to?
Absolutely. So what do I mean by prescriptive exercise? Well, I mean that just in the same way that a doctor prescribes a medication, there's a lot of precision behind it. The doctor will tell you the name of the medication, the dosage, whether you should take it with food or away from food, morning or evening. There's a lot of precision behind that. However, when a doctor says that you should exercise, well, that's all the information you get. You don't know if you should be doing cardio, strength training, or stretching. You don't know the intensity, how hard, duration, how long, or frequency, how many times per week. But just as a doctor would not prescribe the same medication for different conditions, nor should people do the same type of exercise for different conditions. For example, what works for diabetes will not work for osteoporosis, or works for arthritis will not work for depression, or works for anxiety will not work for something else. So that's what I mean by prescriptive exercise. I mean using precision in a very targeted way for a specific condition.
That's awesome. I mean, when you're thinking about anything, when you're talking about exercise or you're talking about nutrition, I think everyone is very different. So anytime you can come up with a personalized approach and you have someone that's really talented at doing that, you're going to get the best results possible. I use the hashtag nutrition because it's different for everybody.
Absolutely.
There's no diet that's exactly right for every single person. If there was, we would have figured it out by now.
100%.
But you do have to figure out what's right for your unique body, and that's part of it. So let's get into specifics. If you wouldn't mind sharing some of your secrets, I'd love to hear. What are some chronic conditions that you work with, and how do you approach them?
Sure. We work with what I call the big four, which is diabetes, high blood pressure, arthritis, and osteoporosis. Okay. So again, there's the parameters of exercise prescription are the FIT principle, F-I-T-T, frequency, intensity, time, and type. Okay, so for diabetes, what's the optimal frequency? And notice that I'm saying optimal, not maximal. Okay. Furthermore, we need to separate into cardio and strength training. So strength training actually seems to be working a little bit better for diabetes compared to cardio. Now, is that to say you shouldn't do cardio? No, I'm saying it works a little bit better, not a lot better. So maybe it should be maybe a 60-40 ratio in favor of cardio. So listeners are wondering, well, wait, why, if strength training is more effective, why do we do it less than cardio? Because with a lower dose, you get a better response. Okay, so strength training for a diabetic needs to be done 2 or 3 times per week. Cardio needs to be done between 3 and 5 times per week, and it's fine to do them in the same workout, in the same session. So that takes us with a frequency. Now notice this. That's a pretty cool effect. So you're doing strength training 2 or 3 times per week, and that helps you control your blood sugar. But if you're on medications, how often do you take them? Well, daily, right? So that's a cool effect. So that's our frequency for exercise. What about intensity? Generally speaking, we want an intensity that allows us to do somewhere between 10 and 15 repetitions to close to failure. And ideally, those repetitions, you're doing them with a tempo that will cause you to reach close to failure within 40 to 70 seconds. Now, why 40 to 70? Why not 30 seconds? Why not 90 seconds? Because we have something in our muscles called glycogen. Glycogen is the plural word for glucose or sugar. And the more glycogen is depleted from the muscles, the more it has to be repleted from the blood. So if you decrease the amount of sugar you have in your muscles, you also have to decrease the number of sugar you have in your blood in order to feed the muscles and restore sugar content within the muscles. And the range of 40 to 70 seconds is the most optimal range for what's called glycogen depletion or sugar depletion. You don't get that with 90 seconds and you don't get it with 20 seconds. So that happens to be a sweet spot. So 10 or 15 repetitions, which makes the exercise 40 to 70 seconds. So we've covered the frequency, we've covered the intensity. intensity being 10 to 15 repetitions, or a weight that allows you to do that. And as for that, so that's the strength training side of things. On the cardio side of things, there doesn't seem to be that much of a difference between steady state and intervals. So there, a wider range of intensities seem to work. Anything over 60% of your maximal heart rate will work. So how do we figure out our maximal heart rate? Well, the generally accepted formula is 220 minus your age. So for example, if our viewer is 50 years old, 220 minus 50 is about 170. And then 60% of 170 is probably about 95 or 100 beats per minute. So anything over about that, if you're 50 years old, will work to improve your blood sugar. So we've covered frequency, we've covered intensity, time, let's talk duration. How many sets and reps need to be done? For strength training, we want to do somewhere between 2 and 4 sets. And again, the reps are somewhere in the 10 to 15 repetition range. And what about cardio duration? It depends on the intensity. The higher the intensity, the lower the duration. Okay. In other words, if we're doing intervals, we don't need to go as long. 20 to 30 minutes gets the job done. If, however, we're doing steady state, it should be more like 30 to 60 minutes. Okay. And type, as you can tell, we need both cardio and strength training. So there's your perfect exercise prescription for diabetes. So if somebody is a diabetic, they'll be able to improve blood sugar control with that exercise alone without even any changes in their nutrition. Now, of course, if they improve their nutrition, I don't think they're going to get even better results, 100%. And I encourage them to do so. But as a standalone routine, this routine is superior compared to, for example, using 15 or 20 repetitions, or compared to using 5 repetitions. Is that a case of more is better with cardio? Does 2 hours of cardio get you better results than 60 minutes? No, it's not a case of more is better. It's a case of enough is enough. We've reached the threshold, and that's what it is. So that's a prescription for diabetes. And there are equal prescriptions for other conditions like high blood pressure, osteoporosis, arthritis, anxiety, depression, and so on.
I'm curious how you would address like the more emotional conditions like anxiety and depression. How would that change your approach?
Sure. Now, I have to say the research on this is not rich just yet, but here is what the research does say. Anxiety and depression are virtually opposite conditions. If you think about it, anxiety is worry about the future. Depression is regret about the past. Okay, so one is the future, one is the past. Therefore, the intensity is vastly different for the two, between anxiety and depression. With anxiety, if somebody does high intensity, it actually makes their anxiety worse. With depression, if somebody does high intensity, it makes their depression better.
Interesting.
Okay?
Interesting.
But why does that happen? What's the mechanism? What's the neurological, physiological, endocrinological mechanism behind that? Well, here's my theory on that. When somebody is doing high intensity, and for our purposes, we'll define high intensity as 85% of the maximal heart rate or more. And again, let's refer back to what is maximal heart rate, to 20 minus your age. So 85% of your maximal heart rate or more is high intensity. If you have anxiety, you're already worried about the future. And when you're working at high intensity, your muscles are burning, you're out of breath. It feels, if you're not a regular exerciser, it feels daunting, it feels uncomfortable, it doesn't feel lovely. So if you know you're going to exercise and it's going to cause some physical discomfort, it's not an injury, but it is discomfort. If not, somebody's not a regular exerciser, it's daunting. You think you have this exercise session coming up and you're like, oh, do I really want to make my body feel these feelings? That's with anxiety. With depression, on the other hand, high intensity works great. Why? Because when we do high intensity exercise, what happens is, yes, it's uncomfortable and it's a little bit, some people would say painful. However, we should really distinguish between the pain or the discomfort of muscular exertion versus the pain of injury to joints. You should never feel your joints hurting, but it's okay to be out of breath. It's okay to feel your muscles burning, perfectly fine. So when you do have that sensation, your brain releases pain blocking hormones or neurotransmitters called endorphins, which I'm sure a lot of readers have heard about. So not only does it block physical pain, it also blocks emotional pain. And that's why intensity for anxiety and depression are completely separate. Again, what works for anxiety will not work for depression. Okay, and also there's differences in the mode. It seems like cardio works for anxiety. It actually improves anxiety, but strength training either has no effect or actually makes it slightly worse. Okay. Whereas for depression, they're about equal. For depression, anxiety, and strength training have about equal effects in depression reduction. So again, you have to use a lot of precision in exercise prescription for different conditions.
That is so fascinating. And I mean, they do, there's so many people that talk about exercise being like therapy, you know, and we probably all at one point experienced that. You're having a bad day and you go exercise and you feel like $1,000,000.
Absolutely.
If you do it right, if you approach it right, it's actually physically and neurologically stimulating you in a way that is healing, is helpful. That's
Absolutely.
Really cool. So do you ever work with people that just come in and they're like, I'm healthy, I don't have a chronic disease, I just want to be a beast, I want to be an athlete?
Yep. Athletes, not so much, but we do have the average person who just wants to lose a few pounds, get into their skinny jeans or into that kind of the dress that they're looking to get into, or get ready for a wedding, get either their own or somebody else's, etc., or vacation. So yeah, absolutely, we have that as well.
So a lot of you know, what we talk about here is chronic conditions, which is what you're talking about. And a lot of time I'll tell people, you know, to really be careful how much they're exercising, particularly if they do have hormonal imbalances, because that can really tip you over into chronic stress where it's just too much for your body. But there is a point, and something that I've noticed, and it sounds similar to what you're talking about, where like if you're in that condition where you have some hormone imbalances and, you know, you don't want to over exercise, strength training tends to be a little bit better for you because it's slow and controlled, and you're not out of breath as much, versus if you're doing a lot of cardio, you're doing a lot of HIIT training and things like that, that acts as a more intense stressor on your body. And so then it's not as helpful. So if you insist, like if you're in that chronic state and you're in your fight and flight and you don't want to stress your body out more, but you need that release, I've typically found that strength training can be helpful in that area as well.
Absolutely. If somebody is chronic stress, well, what's the stress hormone, so to speak, is cortisol. And different exercise protocols will affect hormones differently. And the one that raises cortisol the most is steady state cardio, second most high intensity cardio, and the least strength training.
So you see all these, not to be judgy, but you see all these, like, go to the gym, you see all these women on the treadmills that are just walking or running for hours and hours and hours and hours at a time. You see them there every single day and their body never changes. And that's why.
Yep. There's different mechanisms, and that's one of them. Yeah. You can, one is you can just be losing muscle. Two is it's not working with your hormones. Three is it makes you more hungry. You know, you might burn 300, 400, 500 calories on the treadmill, but your hunger is stimulated by 400, 500, 600 calories. You just replace what you lost.
Right. Which nobody wants. So you do talk to your clients a little bit about nutrition as well. I know that's usually my focus is heavy on people's nutrition. But sometimes when I'm in the gym, I always have to approach it delicately. Because some people want to just dive in and do it all, and other people are like, yeah, I just want to lift weights, don't talk to me about the food.
Baby steps, of course. You gotta meet the clients where they're at.
Yeah. And I remember there was one lady, she came in, and I always, kind of ask some questions, try to get to know a little bit. And we ended up talking about nutrition for like an hour, and she just was so full of questions, and so she so much wanted to learn, and she so wanted to make changes. And this is like the only time at the gym this has really happened. She went home that night. She talked to her boyfriend. They made changes. Both of them lost like 20 pounds in a month.
Wow.
And I was like, what? We talked for like an hour, and you just did what I said, and then you guys are like the poster children.
Oh yeah, that's the best. When you have those kinds of clients, that's incredible. It's very rewarding to see that kind of progress and that kind of compliance.
And I mean, we worked out a little bit, but all of their changes ultimately were just from a few little changes that they made when they went home with their nutrition. It was crazy.
Absolutely. I mean, the basics, for sure. The basics aren't sexy, but they work.
Yeah. Have you found that a lot of people, they do approach it in a way where they feel like it's got to be painful, it's got to be hard. In reality, it's usually way more simple. We just don't want to do it. So a lot of people will say, I can go to the gym and I can sweat it out and I can spend hours with you and I'll do whatever you tell me to do, but I don't want to make any changes at home.
Yeah,
that's like more emotionally difficult.
100%. I always tell my clients about the 1-23 rule. That is, you have 1 hour in the gym to do everything right and 23 hours outside the gym to screw it all up. The lesson is make sure your lifestyle outside the gym supports what you're doing in the gym.
Yeah. Oh, so important. Okay, so I know a lot of my listeners are women, and you specialize in women's fat loss. So I'm really curious if you can talk a little bit about, how do hormones affect that? Women have what seems to be often difficult body types, and they're different, and you're specializing in targeting like the different body types. So can you talk about hormones and female body types a little bit and how you work with that?
100%. How much time do we have?
Oh, we can just you just go.
Okay, this is gonna take a while.
Okay.
So men, we can all just say men are in one category, and that's very easy. Hormones are relatively stable. With women, there are a ton of different hormonal variations. For example, the most obvious one is a regular premenopausal, regularly cycling woman. She has the luteal phase, she has the follicular phase. That's pretty much a normally cycling woman. 14 days in one phase, 14 days in the other phase, very standard. That's the most standard, but there are variations of that. What about women who are on birth control? In which case, it's not quite that nice even cycle. Also, what about women who have PCOS or polycystic ovary syndrome? In which case, they're probably anovulatory. In other words, they don't cycle, or they cycle without ovulation, or just they have amenorrhea, they don't cycle. Or oligomenorrhea, their cycles are irregular. Like one cycle is 11 days, the next one is 42.
Mm-hmm. And they tend to be higher in testosterone as well. So that
correct. Both testosterone and insulin are higher in these women, the PCOS women. And then yet another category is women who are menopausal or postmenopausal. They don't cycle either. And yet another category is women who are menopausal or postmenopausal and on hormone replacement therapy. Mm. So unlike men, we can't really group women into a nice, neat category because as you can see, there's like 4 or 5 different categories right there. And to add to the complexity, there's different versions of hormone replacement therapy. There's different versions of birth control. For some women, there's a different ratio of progesterone to estrogen in the birth control. And there's different types of birth control, which will significantly affect hormones. So I'm going to speak here, unfortunately, in generalities. But if people do want to delve a way deeper into this, more than I can say in this interview, I've created a special link for your viewers, and it's simply FitnessSolutionsPlus.ca/women. Simple as that. So let's talk about a regularly cycling female who is not on birth control and is premenopausal and does not have PCOS. Okay, so theoretically, it's a 28-day cycle. The first 14 days are going to be dominated by estrogen. Okay, that is called the follicular phase. The second 14 days are going to be dominated by progesterone. That's called the luteal phase. So for the rest of this interview, I'm no longer going to be using the terms follicular and luteal because I think estrogen dominant and progesterone dominant are more descriptive. So let's go with that. During the progesterone dominant phase, so the second half of the cycle, is when metabolism is actually slightly higher. A woman can burn as much as 100 to 300 calories per day more during the second half of her cycle compared to the first half of her cycle. However, that sounds like a nice deal, but not metabolism, but cravings also increase more proportionately. So a lot of women notice that the last week of their cycle, that's their PMS, okay, premenstrual syndrome. And that happens due to a number of conditions and hormonal modifiers. A lot of women get cramps, but there's women who also don't get cramps. A lot of women get mood changes, and others don't get mood changes. So all these things need to be taken into account. Furthermore, during the progesterone dominant phase of the cycle, in terms of exercise, rates of injury are much higher compared to the first half of the cycle. Why? Because what is progesterone? It's the hormone of progestation. What is progestation? Well, it's just a different word for pregnancy. Okay, so along with progesterone, the body releases another hormone called elastin, like elastic, but with an N on the end. What does it do? Well, it prepares the body for birth by loosening tendons and ligaments. And what happens when ligaments are looser? Well, the risk for dislocations and injuries are much higher. So if a woman's likely to get more ACL and MCL, in other words, knee injuries, it's likely to be during this phase of the cycle as opposed to the first phase of the cycle. So this is not the time to be doing intensive yoga, and this is not the time to be doing very heavy strength training. This is the time to probably do more like cardio, as well as more light strength training. Nothing requires a lot of exertion, a lot of coordination. On the other hand, the estrogen-dominant phase of the cycle, a woman is stronger, she has more endurance, she perceives herself to have less exertion for any given activity. Okay, this is the time to do the complex activities, the high intensity interval training. If she's into yoga, that's when she should be doing yoga. And although it's questionable whether it's beneficial for her based on joint laxity and so on. So that was my example for a normally cycling female. I can go into others if you want, or if we're on a schedule, we can move on to a different topic.
That is really fascinating. So I've heard about fitness cycling for working out according to your cycle. And basically what you're saying is it's more intense during the first couple weeks of your cycle and a little less intense the last 2 weeks. And if you sort of listen to your body, it should be telling you you have more energy, you feel better, you can lift heavy, you can go hard the first part, and you need to calm it down a little bit the second part. You can still work out, but just don't be quite as intense because you're more prone to injury. Your hormone changes indicate, and that you're probably a little more fatigued at that point as well. And you give your body a little bit of a rest, but keep, do something a little less intense. And then you cycle through that every month.
That's exactly it. And that is correct for regularly cycling women. But again, this will not be correct for postmenopausal women. This will not be correct for PCOS women, both of whom don't cycle. But yeah, for this segment of women, yeah, that's correct.
That's fascinating. Okay, we do have time. Let's talk about one more, if you don't mind. You can choose. I think both are interesting. Postmenopausal, PCOS. Which one do you work with more?
Postmenopausal.
Okay, let's try that.
All right. Postmenopause is very complicated because we used to think it's nothing more than a drop in estrogen. Right. And so in the doctors of the 60s and 70s used to treat that with nothing more than estrogen, right? Just straight up estrogen cream or estrogen pills or so on. But we later realized there are 12 different types of menopause, and it's based on the relationships of progesterone to estrogen to testosterone. One woman might actually have normal estrogen levels, but her progesterone will be low and her testosterone will be high. Another woman might have high testosterone, low estrogen, low progesterone. So there's 12 different variations of this. Mm-hmm.
Quick question. Do you actually ask your clients to do any sort of hormone testing so you have that as a baseline?
About 80% of the time, no. About 80% of the time, we go strictly by symptoms. And
that makes sense.
The bare basics will improve a lot of 80% of people. But if we see that symptoms don't tell us the full story, then we'll give our clients a list of 49 different tests that we want them to ask their doctor to run. So going back to menopause, let's assume it's what I call standard menopause, which is low estrogen, low progesterone, normal testosterone. Sure. And again, there's 12 different variations of this, but we're going to talk about this one in particular. So low estrogen, low progesterone, higher testosterone. In other words, testosterone stays normal compared to premenopausal status, but estrogen and progesterone drop. What does that do for you? Well, now you have a state of a relatively high testosterone. So even though testosterone is within the reference range, estrogen and progesterone are low. And that is why often women going through menopause will gain body fat around their waist. Because after all, who gains body fat around their waist? Well, men. So if testosterone is relatively higher compared to estrogen in postmenopausal women, they will gain fat around the waist. And of course, there's other hormonal modifiers going on during that time. Cortisol may be higher. Why? Because there are 3 organs that can make estrogen. The most obvious one is ovaries. However, after menopause, ovaries no longer make estrogen. So there are 2 others that can do it as well. The adrenal glands, which also release cortisol, which is why cortisol does tend to somewhat go up in menopause, as well as body fat, adipocytes. Fat cells in and of themselves make estrogen. However, it's not the same estrogen as what's made before menopause. The most dominant estrogen before menopause is called estradiol. And there's 3 different estrogens called estrone, estriol, and estradiol. However, after menopause, estradiol decreases a lot, close to 0%. So there's a different dominant estrogen called estriol with an L at the end. And so they have slightly different effects, but in fact, women who actually gain between 4 and 10 pounds of body fat during menopause on the condition that they were not overweight to begin with actually have a better menopause. And yeah, this is 4 to 10 pounds of fat, not muscle. Why? Because again, fat cells make estrogen. So women who do gain those 4 to 10 pounds have an easier menopause, better skin quality, better sleep quality, fewer hot flashes, better mood, etc., etc., etc. So that's actually a desirable effect of gaining 4 to 10 pounds on condition that she wasn't overweight to begin with.
That's so interesting. So you have so much to think about when you interview a client. You're talking about
Absolutely.
what age they are, what hormone balances they're experiencing, what symptoms they have. You kind of get this whole life history. And then you take into effect their body type. So
Correct.
you'll say, okay, you tend to gain weight in your belly, or you tend to gain weight in your love handles, or you tend to gain weight in your thighs. What does that tell you? I mean, that tells you right there, that gives you indications about their hormones, correct?
Yeah. So there's a methodology called biosignature, which is biological signature. The idea is that where you store your body fat tells us about your hormonal profile, which we kind of know intuitively because, after all, where do men store body fat? Well,
Right.
Usually the belly, right? Where do premenopausal women store body fat? Usually buns and thighs and backs of the arms. Where do postmenopausal women store body fat? Usually the belly as well. But it goes a lot deeper than that. So we actually measure 11 different areas for women with skinfold calipers to figure out what is the location of body fat say about someone's hormonal profile. And notice they said location, not quantity. And it's not quite as simple as belly fat versus bun and thigh fat. It goes way deeper than that. For example, triceps correspond to testosterone in both men and women. The upper back and the love handle, those both correspond to insulin. The ribs correspond to thyroid. The stomach is cortisol. The knee and calf correspond to growth hormone, and the quads and hamstrings, or the thighs, correspond to estrogen as a group. And based on the relationships of those relative to each other, we can actually relatively precisely figure out what is a woman's hormonal profile.
What?
It's pretty cool. It's not 100%.
So it's the ratios between where you store your fat, basically, like which is a little bit more than the other, and that kind of indicates your hormonal.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, basically we're looking at the top 3. Maybe for one woman, it might be her triceps, her quads, and her calves. For another woman, it might be her belly, her upper back, and her love handle. And both profiles necessitate different approaches.
That is so fascinating. Now I'm like, measure me. Tell me what you know.
Come to Toronto. I'll do it with pleasure.
So, okay, that kind of brought something up in my mind. I've heard before that you can measure like in between your shoulder blades, and that tells you the amount of carbohydrates you can tolerate or not tolerate. Is that anything
that is correct?
So like the less fat you have, the more carbs you can tolerate, and the more you have, the less you can tolerate. Is that correct?
Correct. So different women, actually not just women, but people have different what's called carbohydrate tolerance. Some people can do great on a high carbohydrate diet. Other people, low carbs make more sense for them. And there are certain things that modify your carbohydrate tolerance. The biggest one is your activity levels. The more active you are, the more carbs you need. But we can't discount the effects of genetics. Some people who are lean can tolerate a lot of carbohydrates, and even some people who are overweight can tolerate a lot of carbohydrates, even when calories are relatively lower. So yeah, there's genetics, there's activity levels, and there's just your physical size.
Interesting. So if somebody wanted to measure that at home, like how would they, what would the guideline be on that to kind of give them an idea or a baseline?
That's a tough one because it's impossible to measure on your own.
Yeah, that's right. You have to somebody else do it for you, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So unfortunately, it's not something you can really do on your own unless you're like a crazy Cirque du Soleil performer with total flexibility. Yeah, exactly.
So if I had my husband do it, and is there like a percentage, like a fat percentage that you go off of, or is that again still in relation to the other measurements that you?
Yeah, everything is in relation to the other measurements. In other words, if all you told me is that the upper back measurement or between the shoulder blade measurement is 22, and I didn't know anything else, it means absolutely nothing to me.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
If that's your highest one, okay, that means something to you. But if it's 22, but your belly is 31, that means something to me. But if all I know is just that single number, it's meaningless.
That is so fascinating. Do you talk about any of this in your book? You're going into analyzing these different approaches. Okay, very cool.
Yeah, so this is both my book, which is also available for free as a PDF if people go to stopexercisingbook.com.
Okay, awesome. I'll put that in the show notes as well. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question before we wrap this up. So, can you give an example of how you would let's say someone struggles with the
back of the arm fat.
Back of the arm fat, and someone else gains weight in their thighs, for example. That's their primary. What exercise approaches, like how would that be completely different?
So those actually would not. Those two actually.
I chose the two that would not be. Okay.
Because both are hormonal modifiers, we actually see those two go up together and go down together.
Interesting. Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
every single woman that comes to work with me at the gym goes, can you work on this for me? It's always their arm, always, every single time.
That's the difficult part.
Yeah.
But the arms and the thighs have very similar approaches. So we have to ask ourselves, why is stubborn fat stubborn? What differentiates stubborn fat from non-stubborn fat? Okay, and there's a few different factors, but the biggest one is strictly blood flow. Stubborn fat has less blood flow going to it compared to non-stubborn fat. For example, think about a man who has a large belly and it's not flabby, but it's solid and it's round. Okay, that belly goes away very, very quickly. Why? Because that's visceral fat. It's under the muscle and there's a lot of blood flow going to it. However, the fat in the lower body is physiologically and hormonally different and metabolically different than the fat in the upper body, in the sense that there's literally less blood flow going to that fat. If you actually, in fact, with some women, or even men who store fat in the lower body, if you touch their quads, they're actually colder than, for example, the belly or the arm, right? And that's just because of less blood flow going to it. Yeah. So how do we increase blood flow to it and therefore mobilize the fat from the area? There's a few different ways to do that. Well, one is a low carbohydrate diet. Basically, under low carbohydrate conditions, you do not lose more fat compared to high carbohydrate conditions of equal calories, but you do recruit more fat preferentially from areas that are stubborn. Okay, that's one example. Another way to stimulate blood flow to that area is before you do cardio, do a set of, let's say, 30 to 50 reps for your quads right before you step on the treadmill or the elliptical or whatever your cardio machine of choice is, and then start doing your cardio steady state, not intervals. What does that do? Well, what it does is, first of all, you're driving blood to your problem area, and then you have to wait a few minutes, about 5 minutes, for the free fatty acids to be released from the fat in that area and go to the muscles and be burned there. Because fat loss is actually a 3-step process. The first step, and I hope this is not too technical, is mobilization. Mobilization is the release of fat out of the fat cell because fat cannot be burned inside the fat cell. The second step is something called transport. Transport means the taking of the free fatty acids from the fat cell using the blood into the muscle. And the last step is called oxidation, or the actual burning. Okay, that's when fat is truly burned. And without the last step, fat isn't burned. You can mobilize, you can transport, but if it's not burned, it's not burned. You don't lose body fat. And so that's the reason behind this protocol. The strength training, the 30 to 50 reps of the first set for the target muscle, helps with the mobilization. You're releasing free fatty acids from the fat cells. The 5 minutes, the 5-minute wait between your strength and your cardio is how long it takes for the transport phase. And then the cardio is the actual oxidation or the burning. So you kind of feed the muscle with the strength training, and then you burn the fat with the cardio subsequently.
So you actually are targeting fat loss in a specific area if you do it very carefully.
Correct. Yeah. For decades, we used to say spot reduction is impossible. That's not 100% true. You could not exclusively, but preferentially recruit fat from a specific area.
Well, that's good news for women everywhere.
Absolutely. If you have several areas, that's an easy way, that's a simple way, not necessarily easy, going on about mobilizing that stubborn fat.
So whichever day, let's say you did cardio 3 times a week and that was separate from your strength training, you would just warm up the area that you're particularly concerned about and then do your cardio after that.
That's exactly it.
Wait 5 minutes and then do your... Very interesting. I've learned so much.
I'm very happy. I hope the viewers did too.
That's so cool. No, I have a feeling this is going to be a very popular episode with women everywhere. So
excellent. Love it.
Where can people find you? Where can they connect with you? Tell us your social media links, your book link again.
Sure. So you can get a free copy of my book, a PDF copy of my book on my website, stopexercisingbook.com. I've also created 2 special pages for your viewers. One is specifically for women, which is FitnessSolutionsPlus.ca/women. And the other one is about chronic conditions. And that one is also FitnessSolutionsPlus.ca/chronic-condition, condition without an S. And those are the 3 links where people can download way more information that I gave in this interview for free. Social media, if you can type my last name, just search me on Facebook. Just mention that you saw me on Kylene's podcast. This way I'll know to add you and not report spam.
I love it. You have to be careful.
Yeah, I have to know who you are.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that's you can connect me on Facebook. As for other social media, I'm really bad at that, so Facebook is it.
Oh, perfect. That's
and
awesome.
LinkedIn. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and I think I've learned a lot, and I think this was really valuable information, so I appreciate you coming on today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.